Hello, economics students. In this video, we're looking at how we answer aggregate supply policy questions, specifically strengths and weaknesses questions to do with aggregate supply policies. So I've got a sample structure here, which is to evaluate the use of some aggregate supply policy X in achieving some goal Y. That could also be living standards or something that means living standards and goals. And the other thing we could do is we might not put evaluate here. We're going to do one that says describe. It means the same thing. You're going to answer the question the same way, regardless of the policy and regardless of the goal and regardless of the task word. So some advice straight from the VCAR examiner's report. Students often focus on how, for some reason with aggregate supply policy, this happens. It doesn't happen so much with aggregate demand policy. But for aggregate supply policy, they focus on how the policy works rather than saying this is the strength of this particular policy or the policies in general. So you need to make sure you focus on the specific strengths and weaknesses of aggregate supply policies. Now, each policy sort of does have a different set of strengths and weaknesses. Immigration policy, it can be turned on and off quickly, but it doesn't help unemployment for, it doesn't help structural unemployment for people who already live in Australia. They're going to be a different set of strengths and weaknesses to, say, R&D grants. Having said that, there are definitely some overlaps. There are some ways you can reduce the mental burden here and sort of keep your strengths that you have to remember to a minimum. So all the budgetary policy aggregate supply policies like R&D, subsidies, education and training, and infrastructure, they all have financial and political constraints because they come via the budget. And they also are able to target areas of weakness or structural issues in the economy, which is a strength. So there's a little way to help. And I would encourage you to kind of find a way to reduce the mental burden so you don't have to learn a set of strengths and weaknesses for every single policy. The marking guide for this question that I've shown you is going to be the same as what we did with aggregate demand, one for describing the strength and then for explaining how that strength helps to achieve the goal, whatever we get, and the same for weaknesses, how it hurts, how it makes it harder to achieve the goal. Okay, here's a question from last year's exam, in fact. And you'll notice that it says describe one strength and one weakness. Now, that's just the same as saying evaluate. We could literally change that to evaluate and still have the same question answered the same way. The next thing we need to think about is the goal, which is full employment. So we need to be using a strength and weakness to show how it would help and hurt the achievement of full employment. It's 4 marks, so it's the same marking guide, but it could be 6. And it's an aggregate supply policy, obviously, because we're doing aggregate supply policy now. But just check that, because that could just be demand there, and then it's a completely different question. Okay? So let's have a go at a sample answer. I'm going to start out by saying what the strength is. You should be thinking as I go along, what would your strength be? Then how are you going to explain how that strength helps to achieve the goal of full employment? And then a weakness of aggregate supply policies. And how that makes it harder to achieve the goal of full employment. Now, just remember, this question I'm doing here hasn't specifically stated which policy I need to do. I can do it generally. I can touch on a range of different policies. But that question could also say the same thing, but immigration policy or education policy, in which case we'd have to focus on that particular policy. So here we can keep it general. So the strength I've used is it can target areas of weakness, and that's pretty much all aggregate supply policies. They can target structural problems, skill shortages and an aging population. And I've even given an example of 2 types of policies that do this, immigration and education, spending on education. Now I need to show how this helps to achieve the goal of full employment. The best way I like to do this is just to go through the aggregate supply argument. Here you're making the argument where you say, well, international competitiveness will be improved and therefore more derived demand for labour and will achieve our goal. The weakness is that it may actually not decrease the level of unemployment in the short term. Immigration brings in new skilled workers, but what about the structurally unemployed in Australia today? They are still going to be unemployed. Bringing in new workers doesn't help them. So I've used immigration as the strength here, as the weakness there. I could have used anything. I've said that then makes it harder to achieve the goal of full employment, as there'll be no decrease in unemployment and therefore make it harder to achieve our NARU target of 4 to 4.5%. Now, just remember, this one is a general question, so I can be very broad, but if you've got a specific policy, you'd have to focus on that specific policy. All right, bye for now. I hope that helped you.